The emergency alert on my phone went off with a shrill noise, repeating 3 times and vibrating angrily, just as I was bringing the last of my stuff into the cabin. I took the device out of my pocket and stared at it in disbelief for about a minute before realizing that I'd have to leave, only moments after arriving. My hands were shaking from the cold as I read through it again. Severe weather alert. Heavy snowfall in the Frontenac region is expected to begin tomorrow. 60 to 80 centimeters of precipitation. Not good. I realized the roads would be impassable by this time, the following day. That meant I would have to leave early the next morning to avoid being stuck on the road in the blizzard, but subsequently meant 0 ice fishing time for me. I'd be lucky to make it home before it started coming down in earnest. Moments later, messages started coming in from my 3 friends who had planned to join me. The group chat notification popped up on my phone as I opened it. Matt, did you see the emergency alert about the storm? I guess the trip's off. What a bunch of crap. Ted, OMFG, a generational storm is what they're calling it now. Looks like we'll have to postpone it a few weeks. I hope you didn't go through with your plan to go up a day early, Jay. Greg, no kidding. What are the chances this blizzard hits on our ice fishing weekend? I messaged back saying I understood we'd have to reschedule. I told them that I made the trip up alone, accompanying the message with forehead-slapping emojis. It sucks that I'll be stuck up here alone, I thought to myself. My dog Gibson pawed at my leg, and I smiled at her, feeling slightly reassured by her presence. Yeah, you're right, Gibby. I'm not completely alone. At least I've got you here with me. After putting down a bowl of water and another containing kibble, my next priority was to start a fire in the small brick stove at the center of the main living area. There was wood stacked up in a neat pile next to it, and a small bag containing kindling which we'd brought with us in the summer and left behind. At first glance, it looked like a large enough stack, but I knew from experience I'd need twice as much as it appeared to make to get through the night, so I went outside to gather more from beneath the boathouse. The family cottage was a rustic one, to put it mildly. There's no running water, no electricity, and the cabin's poorly insulated. Perennially procrastinated repairs were needed in more than one place, including the floor beneath one bed which had partially collapsed, letting in slight trickles of cold air from outside. It was drafty, and I could hear the sound of mice which had made their way through the gaps, burrowing in the bedroom and finding their way into our old coats or sleeping bags or something that we'd left behind. I sighed as I lit the kerosene lamps which were scattered on wobbly tables around the main living area. There was something about having vermin in the cottage that set me on edge, but at least Gibson's presence would keep them at a distance. After filling the place with warm, flickering light from a half-dozen kerosene lamps, I felt a little better. There was reassurance in having fire, and I started working on making a big one in the stove that would keep me warm throughout the night. I loosely wadded up some newspaper and then stacked dry kindling on top, making a teepee. Over that, I added larger pieces of wood, until I had piled it to the ceiling of the small stove. Then I lit a strip of cardboard and held it up to the paper inside, catching it alight in several places, watching as it began to burn and then flared up in a bright white-orange glow. Holding my hands up to the fire, I watched it and warmed myself up. Eventually I took off my boots and my coat, the entire cottage getting a little toasty. There's no sense unpacking, I thought, taking a beer out of the cooler and opening it. I took a sip and couldn't help but grimace at the taste. I'd never tried the brand before, and I'd picked it up on recommendation. It was awful, and lukewarm to boot. Par for the course, considering the trip so far. Took out my phone and watched some Netflix while beer went flat beside me. I lifted Gibson up onto the futon with me so that she was off the floor and close to the fire where it was warm. Eventually I got bored of Office reruns and called it a night, adding another log to the fire and reminding myself to wake up in an hour to keep it going. Pulling the futon even closer to the stove so that it was close to the fire as safety would allow, I curled up in my sleeping bag and drifted off into an uncomfortable slumber, constantly tossing and turning, trying to stay warm, but not really succeeding. I woke up to the sound of whining coming from Gibson's trembling form on the bed beside me. I was so cold that I was actually scared. My teeth were chattering uncontrollably, and I realized a few hours had passed. The fire had gone out completely, reduced to mere embers at the base of the stove. I put on my jacket and blew hot breath onto my fingers, pulling Gibson closer to me. She was shaking as well. My hands were trembling as I put more newspaper and kindling on the fire, blowing it into embers and hoping they would reignite. My lungs felt frozen, and my heart was beating fast, my skin prickling with pins and needles, turning it into a total numbness in my extremities. I'd never felt so cold in my life. I realized I was far beyond the weather forecast for tomorrow. It seemed like it was minus 30 degrees, and steadily dropping further. Terrified that I wouldn't be able to get my body temperature back up, my mind started racing, thinking of worst-case scenarios. If I couldn't stop shaking pretty soon, it would be impossible to start the fire again. I recalled that my truck was just outside, and I could get in there and start it up, turning on the heat until I felt warm again. The idea of getting out there and the truck refusing to start was too much to take, though. Considering the state of the beat-up old Ford, that seemed like a distinct possibility. So I continued stoking the fire, blowing on the precious few embers and adding more newspaper every so often until the tiny flame had begun to grow. I held my shaking hands up to the measly fire and added pieces of kindling sparingly, one by one, terrified of it going out again. Pulling Gibson closer, we shared each other's warmth, and I began to feel halfway human again. A sound came from outside the cabin suddenly, startling me and causing me to jump. My heart skipped a beat, then pounded faster and faster in my chest. A noise like fingernails being dragged along the siding could be heard from all around. Echoing in the small space, something was going from one end of the cottage to the other, attempting to get inside. Deep, guttural breathing could be heard, grunting and snorting, desperate as it scraped its talons along the boarded-up windows. Gibson began to whine, making high-pitched noises as she huddled closer to me, and I put my hands over her muzzle, muffling her sound. Was it a bear, I wondered? I realized I was holding my breath. I thought about the holes in the flimsy facade of the cabin, the spot beneath the bed where mice were getting in. I thought about the broken screen door and the wooden one behind that which needed to be replaced, almost falling off its rusty hinges. The entire cottage felt so frail and insecure all of a sudden, and I heard the loud noise of whatever that thing was, breathing heavily just outside, trying to get in. Maybe it was too cold out there even for it. The ground shook from the weight of the creature as it made its way around the cabin. I was so focused on it that I didn't notice the fire going out at first as it fizzled down to embers. I continued holding my breath until it was gone. Then I relit the fire, my shaking hands barely able to get it going again. Once it was burning hot, I didn't sleep anymore. I pulled Gibson close, and the two of us stayed up all night, watching the fire with wary eyes, taking occasional glances at the door. Even once we were both warm, we continued to shiver. When the sun came up, I didn't notice at first. It was dark in the cottage one minute, and then it was light. I blinked my eyes a few times and rolled out of bed, deciding I would waste no more time leaving. I was hoping the bear, or whatever had been outside the night before, was gone. Gibson was scratching at the front door, asking to be let outside to pee, which told me it was probably safe. In the light of the morning, all that had happened seemed to be a bad nightmare, and I told myself maybe it had been, till I got outside and saw the claw marks that marked the exterior wall. Shuddering, I threw my belongings in the truck, doused the fire with too much water, and took one last look at the place. What a weekend this had turned out to be, I thought to myself. With more people around, it would be easier to keep the fire going, taking turns feeding it with wood so that everyone could sleep through the night. But it was frightening being up here by myself, even with Gibson by my side. I'd never done it before in the winter, and I never would again. There were too many things that could go wrong. Freak snowstorm, a fallen tree blocking the road, getting stuck or going into a ditch, and those were just the beginning. I wanted to get out of here before any of those things happened. The truck didn't want to start at first. I turned the key in the ignition twice, hearing only the click of the absence of any engine noise. Cursing loudly, I checked to make sure I hadn't left the interior lights on or something which would drain the battery. Satisfied there was still a charge, I tried one more time, and finally the old shitbox let out a cough and kicked into life. The engine began to sputter before finally settling into a steady, rusted purr. "All right, Gibson, let's get out of here," I said, rubbing my dog's head and smiling as she blinked at me. She looked content in the front seat, happy to be back in the truck and out of the cold cottage. There was a thin layer of snow on the gravel road, and the tires moved easily enough. I looked up to see the sky was turning gray above us. A few snowflakes were just beginning to fall. The weather was making an early appearance. I turned on the radio, and sure enough, they said the same thing I was thinking. The storm would be arriving early. By noon, the highways would be a parking lot. Whiteout conditions. Be prepared to be trapped in your car. Have emergency services ready. My anxiety was through the roof as I went around a bend in the road. Hitting the gas, I came to the first big hill and went over it, seeing something strange up ahead as I came over the rise. Whatever it was blocking the road. Massive, brown. The lumpy fur shape got bigger as I pulled up in front of it. The bear, which had been trying to get into my cottage the night before, was dead, lying in the middle of the gravel road and blocking it completely. First, I thought it had frozen to death. I got out of my truck and inspected it and was surprised to find there was a horrible smell coming from the carcass. It was a chemical smell, noxious and unpleasant, like some sort of factory waste. The snow had melted all around the beast, the blood and entrails pooling around the far side. What the hell could have done something like this? Aren't bears at the top of the food chain? Alpha predators? Gibson was by my side, but she didn't venture anywhere near the body. Usually she would have gotten curious, trying to sniff at it or something like that, but she stayed next to me, emitting a low growl. The road was completely blocked, I realized. There was no way out, not unless I could move it. No matter which way I attempted it, the giant body of the dead bear would not budge. It weighed a ton. There were large trees on either side of the road, so close to the driving path. There was only one way out, which was by driving across the frozen lake, and that was way risky. I hadn't been able to test the thickness of the ice yet. It would need to be nearly a foot deep for me to feel comfortable, but there was a clear way on and off the ice if it came down to it. I got back in the truck and threw it in reverse since there was nowhere to turn around. I felt sick to my stomach, nervous with anticipation and fear, uncertain of how things were going to play out. Once back in front of the cottage, I got out of the truck and went down to the ice with my spud. Walking out onto the lake, I cleared a spot with my boot and began to dig. I dug with the sharpened metal rod. Satisfied that I'd found the bottom of the ice, I put the tape measure through the hole, hoping it would be close to a foot. Looking at the tape measure, my heart sank. The ice was barely 7 inches thick, just below the minimum 8 inches where it would be safe to drive a vehicle across. My truck was on the heavy side, and I wouldn't feel comfortable unless it was a full foot thick. I pulled out my phone and checked for a signal, deciding it was time to call someone for help. Who would I call? I wasn't sure, but I knew I couldn't get out of this jam by myself. Of course, I muttered out loud, seeing the signal bars were down to 0, and the words "no service" were printed over the top of the screen. Surely I would have gotten another severe warning alert otherwise, because snow was now being dumped down on me from above, and the sky had turned nearly black with the approaching storm. I typed out a message in the group chat, telling them my situation, hitting send regardless of the lack of signal. I knew from experience that it would go through eventually. I just hoped it would be sooner rather than later. Gibson let out a loud, high-pitched whine, her tone rising in volume as she began to bark. High, persistent yips that were totally unlike her. She backed away, then let out a stream of urine, her hind legs trembling as she did. I looked up from my phone, and saw what she had spotted. Across the lake, something was moving in the trees. I saw fingers wrapping around a tree trunk, too high up, the nails too long and too sharp to be a person. Whatever this giant was, it looked similar to a man, but it was massive. It peered out at me from beneath the boughs of the trees, its head probably 15 feet off the ground. Its skeletal limbs matched the monochromatic tone of the birches on either side of it, a gray, pale white shade. I couldn't distinguish the entire form of it in the shadows, but I could make out its eyes. They reflected back at me, catching the gray light coming through the clouds. And then I saw its mouth spread wider in a grin, teeth dripping blood, and it disappeared back into the darkness. The temperature felt like it had dropped to 30 below again, and I began to shiver involuntarily as I looked down to see Gibson doing the same. There was only one choice, only one place we could go: back to the cabin. It was either that or risk plunging the truck into the frozen lake, attempting to drive across. We were on a small peninsula surrounded by water on all sides. Only one way in and one way out, and that way was blocked by the body of a giant brown bear. I took the dog back inside the cottage and locked the doors, taking uneasy glances outside through the cracks in the boarded-up windows. What the hell was that thing in the forest, I asked myself over and over again, but no answers came to mind. There were no creatures I could think of that were 15 feet tall, with reflective eyes that stood on two legs like a man, capable of disemboweling a full-grown brown bear, capable of causing the temperature to plunge all around me. There was only one creature capable of that, and it wasn't supposed to exist. It was something from myth, from folklore, from legends that weren't supposed to be real. "It's a Wendigo," I said out loud, immediately regretting the words, as if saying them made them true, as if saying them would summon it. Wendigos are supernatural creatures born of Canadian First Nation folklore. They live in cold, remote places and make people go mad merely through their presence. They thrive on hunger, despair, and loneliness of their victims, who usually live in remote communities. They drive families apart, instilling urges of cannibalism in people and making them want to consume their loved ones. During the lean, hard months of the winter, this usually happens. They turn people into raving cannibals, driving away all their loved ones, and then once they're alone, the Wendigo strikes. It either consumes you while you're still alive, tearing flesh from your bones while you beg and scream, or it turns you into one of its own kind. But the Wendigo's greatest curse is that no matter how much flesh it consumes, it only grows hungrier. With every ounce of meat it takes in, it grows taller and more emaciated. Its hunger grows more insatiable with its height, until it's a towering beast with its head amongst the treetops as it roams the forest, constantly searching for its next meal. Gibson whimpered and burrowed her face into my armpit as if hearing my inner thoughts. Trying to reassure her, I stroked her fur and told her it'd be okay, although I had a feeling it wouldn't. I tried to get the fire going again, but it was a fruitless effort. Everything inside the stove was damp and wet, and scolded myself for dousing the fire with so much water. Still, I kept at it, knowing we might be stuck here for a while. Pretty soon the wind was howling and blowing outside, and the snow was piling up in front of the door. I made a point of opening it every so often to clear the snow from the steps, knowing that I would need firewood, taking weary glances off into the forest across the lake as I did so. Finally, I got the fire started, a low guttering flame in the stove, which wanted to go out all the time. Everything was damp, but I kept feeding it fresh kindling, nursing it, until it was able to keep going by itself. Hours passed as we waited to either run out of firewood or be attacked by the creature. We were running low on kindling and the sun was beginning to set. My stomach rumbled with hunger when I felt something strange. The ground suddenly shook beneath my feet, and I heard Gibson whining from beside me. "What is it, girl?" I asked, my voice catching in my throat as I realized the answer. It was the creature. It was back. The dining room table began to rattle and bounce up and down as whatever was outside got closer, and I imagined the creature lifting the roof off a cabin like a top on a dish in a fancy restaurant, picking me up and eating me whole like a wriggling shrimp. A second later, there was a sound at the front door, metal being ripped and sheared as I realized the creature was making its way in. The screen door landed on the ground with a crash, and then the wooden door was being torn from its hinges an instant later. Cold air rushed inside as Gibson began to let out shrill, panic barks of terror. I heard the thing tearing apart the front entrance, easily ripping apart the wood and making the doorway larger so that it could come inside. I tipped over the dining room table to use as a barricade. I picked up a chair, the only weapon I could find nearby, thinking I could throw it at the thing's face to defend us, when I heard a strange noise from the front. It was a car horn honking. Someone had come to save me. I heard a loud ding and pulled out my phone and saw the green check mark beside my group chat, indicating that at some point it had gone through, at some brief moment when there'd been a gap in the clouds. Reading the new messages brought a hopeful smile across my face. "Matt, you just had to skip town a day early and go ice fishing, didn't you?" "What the hell is that thing?" Ted was yelling from outside. "I don't know, but it's trying to get inside. Jay, are you there?" I shouted back that I was. There was a loud screech from outside, which I realized had come from the monster. They'd actually wounded it somehow. I ran to the front door with Gibson and looked out, seeing the creature for the first time. It stood with its back to us, its head among the treetops, even taller than it appeared at first. My friends had caught it off guard, but now it was fully aware of them, and it was going after them. The Wendigo was distracted by something in front of the cottage, and I realized that one of my friends had gotten out of the car and they were using themselves as bait so that I could flee the cottage safely. They had driven across the ice with their lighter vehicle, just as I had hoped to do. I guessed that they'd run into trouble moving the body of the giant bear which blocked the road. "Jay!" Ted screamed out the window, driving the car in a circle on the ice, as if too terrified to stay still. I raced over to the car, slipping and sliding on the ice. It was Matt who was distracting the Wendigo, I realized, and I called for him to get away from the thing. It was too large, too fast. He didn't know what he was dealing with, but that was Matt. He was always act first and think later kind of guy. Not only that, but he often put himself in harm's way for his friends. He turned to look at me and gave a thumbs up, his attention diverted from the creature for a split second. As Gibson and I got into the car, we heard his scream. I looked up to see the Wendigo, close the distance in an instant, and was picking him up like an insect, turning him over and beginning to bite him. As Matt screamed for help, the creature peeled off his skin, exposed his skull as it ate his face. The calls for help turned to bubbling gurgles and wet, choking sounds, and I nearly got out of the car to run after him, but Ted grabbed my wrist and pulled me back inside. "You can't save him," he said with wet-rimmed eyes, and eventually I relented. We raced our way across the icy lake, making a path through the blizzard, cutting a swath off the fresh-fallen snow on our way back to mainland. For a while, we debated what to do. Should we call the police? Our friend had just died, after all, but we knew that if we did, we'd be considered suspects. And with no other reasonable explanation, they'd pin his death on us. They'd say we'd killed him. There were no boxes they could check on an official police report citing a Wendigo attack. So, since such things didn't exist, being myths and legends, we'd be their only suspect. As it turned out, we didn't have to worry about it, though. A message popped up from Matt on the group chat just a few minutes after we got home, and I had to tell myself that it wasn't all just a nightmare, a hallucination from the cold and lack of sleep and food. But Ted and Greg both told me I hadn't imagined it. What we saw was real, as much as I wish it wasn't. The three of us read the message on the group chat again and again. My heart was beating fast, and a sick knot was growing in my stomach, bile rising in my throat that I could taste inside my mouth. "Hey guys, you really missed out on a feast. Ice fishing is just as much fun in a blizzard, if not more so. Let's reschedule the trip for next week, okay? I'll be waiting for you here. As much as we didn't want to go, we've resolved that we have to. We can't leave Matt like that. We have to help him. Next week, we're making the trip back up there. Even if it kills us. Started renting this house a few weeks ago. It was a nice 2-bed, 1-bath with 2-car garage, sizable driveway. The grass was in good health, and the wooden fence was always painted a bright, clean shade of white every few weeks. It was like a house from the 50s, because it was. There was something charming about it. Wooden paneling, the porch with the backyard deck, grill, cozy little shack out back full of tools, and the lawnmower. I was allowed to rent this out for as long as I needed, so I could write a report about a murder. One that just so happened to have taken place in this very house. Back in the 60s, a couple lived here. They were crazy about each other, and about some of the neighbors as well. For over 2 decades, they poisoned, stabbed, and shot various other families. It was never clear why they did it, or what motivated them to do it in the first place. In the end, it was chalked up to pure insanity. A pair of psychopaths married together. They had a son and a daughter, but the grandparents had taken them out of the household after finding out about the first murder. They kept it quiet, of course. The house has been turned into a sort of museum and rental space over the past few years. It was closed off to the public for over 3 decades, but recently it opened back up for people to look at. Turns out that renting out and giving tours of a haunted house was profitable. Who'd have figured? Oh, I forgot to mention that it was haunted by the souls of the couple who killed those families back in the day. That was something I was having a hard time documenting in the report I was writing. I mean, come on. Haunted house? The hell is this? A horror novel? I was dead wrong about it, though. It all started one night when this one song started playing on the phonograph in the living room. It was Put Your Head on My Shoulder by Paul Anka. Can't get it out of my head. Played over and over every night. The nights would go the same way, over and over. I would go to bed around 10 p.m., and after that, the house would fall into an odd silence. The lights came on in the living room, and that song would just start playing all by itself. The movement of footsteps could be heard as they creaked against the hardwood floor. Please, come out and join us. It's quite a fun night, a female voice would call out. Come now, be our guest. Take a seat out here. We'll drink tea and listen to the radio. A male voice would soon follow up with the woman's voice. It's not safe to get up and check it out, despite their words of assurance. Doing so could bring unknown results. It may have been safe, but something in my body told me otherwise. I'd stay in bed until 6 a.m. That's the time that everything would fade away and turn to normal. The little dance and music would go on all night, but I would still be able to sleep. While dozing off, it seemed like the music would go silent despite still playing. I guess their only goal at first was to draw me out. It's been a few days of this before things took a step up. I've been hearing, I don't know quite how to put it, people. It's almost like a party's going on during the night hours. Again, I find that I cease to hear it once I fall asleep. Guess these little events are mere attempts at giving incentive for me to leave the room rather than to torture me. Although, every so often, they'll knock on the door and ask me to come out again. It only lasts a few seconds before the person walks away. They're real polite about it, though, and they don't stick around. They just ask and then vanish once they don't hear an answer. During the daytime, I've been logging this information into my report. Feels like I'm going insane a little. This can't be real, right? I must be breathing some kind of hallucinogenic gas or something. Got the vents checked, but nothing's wrong with them. They did need to be cleaned, though, so at least I had an excuse to get them worked on without looking like a crazy person. I never found a trace of this couple during the day. No shoes, no footprints, nothing moved. Nothing. Not a single goddamn thing out of place or touched. Hell, things seem slightly cleaner in the morning. Maybe the fact that I try to keep things as they were, though. I spend my days walking around the neighborhood. People living around here are mostly millennials, the ones who either inherited these houses and chose to rent them out or live in them instead of selling them, or renting them to cut down on certain parts of the mortgage. I drive into town and head to a coffee shop I like for a few hours. I leech off the free Wi-Fi so I can get my things done. There's free Wi-Fi at the house, but it's a gamble on the speed and the connection. I also like starting my day off with coffee and going about my hours to get a cake and a few sandwiches. It's now been 3 weeks and I think I'm almost done. I was given 4 weeks before the deadline to make a report on the house so the people I work for can get some info. They're not exactly well informed since most of the people have either died, killed themselves, or simply walked out after a few days. The only reason I've survived this long is that I've read every last bit of data I could find from both historical records and the half-assed papers people put together before throwing their badges to the side and working for another newspaper. I'm barely getting anything interesting so far, aside from the fever dream of a stay I'm getting from this place. These days, during the 3rd week, have been pretty weird. I wake up at the same time only to hear humming. Musical humming, not particular songs, just random notes. This is the wife humming while making some sort of breakfast. Her name's Rose, and her husband is Clark. Can't believe I've been referring to them as husband and wife all this time. It changes during the day, but it ranges from bacon and eggs to cereal and orange juice with toast to a full pancake breakfast sometimes. They got bigger and bigger each day. On day 1, I stayed in my room until the humming stopped. It only lasted about 15 to 20 minutes. After that, I would check the kitchen to find a freshly cooked breakfast. Rose wasn't anywhere in sight, though. I was hesitant to eat it at first, since I wasn't sure what would happen, but I was hungry that morning, and I didn't feel like making a drive to the city so early in the morning. Food was good. I didn't feel poisoned or anything afterwards. I would set the dishes in the sink and take a shower. Not even 15 minutes after getting out of the shower and getting dressed, the dishes were washed, dried, and sitting in the cupboard. I'm honestly not sure why people have been dying or quitting this trip. So far, I've stayed out of their way and never really messed with anything. I feel like a guest here, and act as one, which is probably the key. You can't live here, merely stay for a certain amount of time. I don't know how long that time frame is, though. Week 4, these last 7 days are my final chance to wrap this up before the deadline. I'm nowhere closer to finding out how these past journalists died, why this couple did what they did, or anything like that. The best I'm going to do is probably pump out a short guide on how not to die here. This week was the hardest. The haunting extended all day. You see, the morning would start out as normal as it had last week. Waking up, hearing the humming, waiting for it to stop, eating a little breakfast, putting the dishes in the sink, etc. The real difference is they're now visible and active, all day and night. Clark spends his days sitting on an armchair reading a newspaper. Funny detail is that the date on the newspaper follows our date, only the month and day, not the year. He's always dressed in a white dress shirt with the top button left undone. Simple, ironed black dress pants with a leather belt neatly wrapped around them. Brown leather shoes, more like loafers actually, I guess, Kind of dress shoes you just kind of slip on. They were always shined and cleaned. His right leg is on the floor with his left leg stretched out over the right. The newspaper covers his face. The only thing that could be seen from the other side was the occasional cigarette smoke puffing up. The cigarette never had a scent, though. Phantom tobacco, I guess. Pretty funny. Rose would be sitting on the couch most of the time, either knitting, reading a magazine, or watching the TV. It was a large black and white TV, the outside made of hardwood, the thick glass of the display, and the antenna sticking out of the top. Can't miss those two large dials on it either. There was always something different on TV. One moment it was a cooking show, the news, even a Western movie. The volume was always able to be heard, but sort of faint as well. Kind of like a sort of background noise you barely notice after a while. It was not a good idea to verbally or physically interact with them in any way. Not even looking at them was an option. I've never seen either of their faces outside of photos because I'm always staring at my phone or laptop, or even intentionally staring at the floor. The carpet was kind of pleasant to look at. They never spoke during the day. Rose would sometimes clean the house, sometimes dust, vacuum, even washing the dishes. I lied. I've caught small glimpses of their faces from reflections. They are in their young age for the 60s, the prime of their life, right before the major killing streak. I can't even explain any of this. This house could slowly be turning into a self-contained instance of time, but that wouldn't make sense since the Wi-Fi here works. My money is up to date and my tech can be charged. A few of the outlets have swapped out for modern ones. Only the ones not already connected to appliances or the TV itself. Breakfast, lunch, dinner would always appear on the table at different times of the day. Breakfast at 6 a.m., lunch at noon, dinner at 6 p.m. I would always eat in silence and put the dishes in the sink. I've tried rinsing the dishes before at least, but the water never touches them. I don't know how to explain it, but I would turn on the water and it would just phase through the dishware. I gave up after one day. Well, this is the final day. I'll be scheduling this report to send itself in a few hours. I don't even want to manually do it since I'm rinsing my hands of this whole worthless paper once I leave. There was one thing I wanted to check out, though. I'm gonna continue this bit on my phone. I always wanted to check out the basement. I forgot that it even existed this whole time. The door wasn't blocked or locked, luckily. The door just opened up, but the light bulb turned on for about a second before blowing out. It didn't actually explode or anything, but the light sort of just flashed and burned out like a flashbang. The steps are quite loud as they creak. I'm not sure what that smell is. Like a mixture of gas and rotten meat, maybe? The door just closed itself, the only light I have down here from my phone flashlight. There's some kind of red puddle leading to a room down here. I don't like it. I'm writing this live so my boss can read it. Yeah, I know, hard to believe I'm actually being productive. The puddle's blood. There's a body down here. No, wait. There's multiple bodies down here. I can see dozens or even hundreds of flies just covering these bodies. I think I recognize some of the badges around their neck. All of these bodies smell fresh. Is time frozen down here or something? Shoot! There's footsteps coming down here. I'm squeezed behind a broken down fridge. Maybe Clark will give up his search in a few minutes. My 911 alert just failed. This one message will probably be the last thing that'll automatically upload. I think I just made a horrible mistake. I wasn't supposed to come down here. If you're reading this, please call for connection lost. Report upload incoming. I recently got to rent out a house from the 60s. The house was famous because of a couple that used to live here from the 60s to the 80s. They were known for killing people and families during that time period before finally being caught by the police. These were the things I've learned during my stay in this house. During the first week, there will be dancing. From 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., there will be activity in the living room. The couple will appear out there, and Dance to a song called Put Your Head on My Shoulder, along with a few others. They will assure you that it's fine if you come out and join them. Don't do it. I've never attempted, so I don't know if anything happens. But trust your gut. During week 2, they will be hosting a party. The sound of many people will come from the living room, as if people have come over for the evening. Every few hours, the door will knock as someone on the other side will invite you to join them. During week 3, the haunting will break into the day. During the morning, the wife will be in the kitchen, making breakfast. Do not leave your room until she's done. You can use the bathroom, but don't look or enter the kitchen. You will hear her hum for about 20 minutes. Once it stops, you can go about your day. Food's perfectly fine to eat and is actually encouraged. Make sure you put the dishes in the sink. During week 4, if you survive that long, they will roam the house 24/7. Do not make eye contact with either of them. They'll mainly stay in the living room. The husband sitting on the armchair reading a newspaper, the wife reading a magazine or knitting. Occasionally she'll clean the house. If you're going to be in the living room, keep your eyes low and do not verbally interact with them. If you do, I'm not sure. There have been reports of them killing people during this time. Acting hostile at them or trying to kill them will not end well. Many have rented this place out and almost all of them have died. Some were filled with stab wounds. Some were in the tub, drowned. Others were framed as if it were a suicide. You may wonder why the government hasn't merely torn the house down. I'm not sure. Seems like the money they make from this place keeps it running longer. They will not force themselves into the room during the night. Unless you interact with them, they will not attack or come your way. Any food or snacks prepared is fully safe and encouraged to consume. Make sure you set the dishes and the silverware in the sink. They will be cleaned. Stay outside of the house. It's your best chance to live. Follow the rules. You might make it out alive. One of the first things my EMS cert teacher told me was that the touchiness would pass. That one day I'd be slipping IV needles into arms as easily as I flossed between my teeth. Yet, I was 2 weeks into my first full-time ambulance gig, and I was still shaking between calls. The 3-story inferno raging downtown didn't help, but that's not where me and my partner Tom were heading. Prior to this whole situation, our night was quiet, mostly dealing with confused dementia patients or burgeoning schizophrenics. The MO is either to find their medicine or transport them to the hospital. Most of our calls were like that, low stakes, right in my comfort zone. But now we were dispatched to a priority 2 emergency, the kind of call that necessitates the whole lights and siren deal. Someone called in a possible self-harm situation involving one of their neighbors. Serious stuff, but I had Tom with me. He was a vet, a former cop, and I was always in his steady hands. The issue was that the downtown inferno had really messed traffic up for 2 solid miles in front and behind us. We hadn't moved more than 10 yards in about 5 minutes, and even though it was protocol to have a police response as well, we were as close to the front as it got. Hell, we were the front line at that point. Another minute passed in gridlock before Tom finally blurted out, "You gotta go alone." And there was really no other way. Abandoning the ambulance and blocking further fire trucks wasn't an option. Solo responses were rare, sure, but it was necessary in desperate circumstances like this. I knew it was coming, but it was the last thing I wanted to hear. Don't get me wrong, I wanted to go. Deep in my heart, I would be willing to lay my life down for a patient. I wanted so badly to be that type of cool, methodical mind that entered an emergency situation and eased their patient back from the brink. It just hadn't come to me yet. Tom saw it. I'm sure if seconds weren't the difference between life and death, he would have given me 5 minutes for a pep talk. For now, though, all he could do was pat my shoulder and smirk. "Knock 'em alive, kid." So out I went, squeezing myself between the bumper-to-bumper traffic until I found myself on the correct cross street. There's Something horrifying in the minutes between their call and your arrival. The feeling creeps in while you're slipping over broken sidewalks and homeless tents, realizing you're the beginning and the end of their recovery. It all comes down to you, the practitioner. To be blunt, you're God for those few minutes, and God was having a pretty bad time gaining entry. Someone buzzed me in, but of course, apartment 13B was locked. Our response time was already woefully long, so waiting for police to break it down was not an option. I went to town using my bump key, prying it open less with finesse and more with raw, frantic energy. The door opened to near complete darkness. I saw candles around the corner and the end of the hall, but a whole lot of unknown was between me and there. Light switches were oddly dead, so my flashlight had to guide my feet. From the little I could see, it was a well-lived-in apartment. At least 2 generations had sunk their essence into the carpet. That's when the smell hit. It was familiar, the scent of a man. No, not exactly, no. It was like my granddad's musk. I hadn't smelled it since I was in his lap as a kid, but the recall was instantaneous. It made me feel oddly safe, which lasted only a few seconds, considering what I would soon see. Around the corner, there was a metric ton of candles in the living room. Every surface was covered with them. Weirdly, the wax was melting from every kind of receptacle except a candle jar. Bowls, mugs, shot glasses. The source of the musk, no doubt. They cast the entire room in a homemade devilish glow. They lit the way to the girl I would come to know as Ellie. She had wrapped herself up in the corner, laying motionless. Baggy sweats and a white tee hid her frailty at a glance. I rushed to her, set her on her back, and began to triage. First was the bruising on her neck. It was fresh, must have tried some sort of strangulation, but it wasn't what did her in, so I quickly moved on. Blood caked her white t-shirt. I followed it to her wrists. They were messy slashes, but they didn't look deep enough to do real harm. That's when I noticed the culprit of my light switch woes. Sloppily wound duct tape attached a fork to her hand, just a foot away from the charred-out power outlet. Christ, she'd electrocuted herself. Full cardiac arrest. She could have died in the seconds it took me to triage. My hand found position and began compressions. I regained some confidence as I found my rhythm, laying the foundation of the AED to work its magic. The repetitiveness gave me my first moment to take Ellie in. She was young, maybe even younger than my 19-year-old sister. Her being in this position seemed so wrong. I could see this face getting drunk at a college party, waiting tables at a diner in town, but not here. I thought about the second chance I wanted to give her as I continued compressions. That's when the room started to feel warm. The candle scent now got a bit clearer. It wasn't the manly musk of someone's grandfather. It was an animalistic scent. Dried blood and mange. Something that activated a long-buried fight-or-flight instinct in my primitive genes. I had to keep on with my compressions, though. Even if I had lost track of time, I might have been way short of 2 minutes when I decided to stop CPR and pick up the AED. It wasn't until I'd unzipped the bag that I realized this was the first time I'd used the AED in the field. I'd learned the ins and outs, tested it on course dummies, and seen others use it, but I'd never actually been tasked to use it in the field. I pulled up her shirt and applied the wire pads, again feeling a warmth that sent a bead of sweat down my neck. Finally, me, the naive idiot, decided to turn it on. The flames of the candle array now burned twice as bright. They licked high enough to start to uncover some of the shadows against the wall, revealing scraggy-looking wallpaper. No time to admire the settings, though. I waited patiently as the AED robotically counted down and administered the first shock. It picked up heartbeat rhythm automatically, but I still used my fingers to feel her absent pulse directly. It remained still. No response. Desperate, I repositioned my fingers as I checked for a pulse, and I didn't find one. Of that I was supremely confident. My fingers wiped some of the blood from her wrist as I did. Only now did I decide her cuts weren't at all random. They, in fact, cut out symbols in her flesh. A star. No, that was a pentagram. But the affirmative boop of the AED took my mind off the task. It rejiggered her heartbeat, automatically suspending its shocks. Any weirdness I felt came secondary to my resumed chest compressions. Resuscitation, especially with a faint heartbeat like this, always felt to me like pulling someone from quicksand. You're shoulder deep, clinging to a couple of fingers, hanging onto that little grip as you try to extract the entire person. If you're good, that little grip's all you need. I pumped with that metaphor in my mind's eye, laser focused on my goal. For 15 seconds, I felt like the ideal practitioner I dreamed of being, reeling my patient back from the brink. Until, I shit you not, the flames gained a life of their own. At first I thought it was just the ones directly in front of me, but as I spun I realized it animated every live flame, each one dancing its way towards the ceiling, causing the receptacles to bubble over with wax. You spend a lifetime watching flames move randomly, flicking with the wind, and I promise you their sudden conscious movement will rattle you to your depths. A full red light illuminated what I now realized wasn't wallpaper. It was blood-inked writing, overlapping scrawls of mantras over every wall and even possibly the ceiling. I imagined her crawling like a spider as she wrote, "Praise be all glory to the true one, may his new kingdom reign." Then finally the one spanning the entire main room. "May my blood serve as sacrifice." I suddenly felt like an interloper in a place I should not be, intruding on an ancient ritual. Whatever had its grip on her seemed to be in the room with me now. The flames kept up their height so I could take it all in, wax spilling over onto the floor. Looking back now, I think it was offering me a chance to reconsider what I was doing. It had its claim on her, but as her practitioner, I felt I had an equal claim. I resumed compressions, faster now, desperate to get her back as fast as possible. The flames swirled, seeming enraged by this development, and not letting me forget it. Yet somehow I was able to separate my technique from my panic-ridden nerves, keeping a tight rhythm for almost a minute before the girl finally snapped upright. The flames dissipated in an instant, down to tiny weak flickers. Her eyes were shut at first, like she was still within a blissful dream. Then her eyes opened to what she seemed to clearly think was a nightmare. "Where'd he go? Where is he?" She seemed taken by complete surprise, grounding herself back in reality as she pawed at herself. My practiced lines of patient comfort only enraged her. You have to let me get back." With rabid panic, she started to grab at her wrists, but soon realized it wasn't the most economic method of return. I finally regained my composure just as I saw her eyes meet the burned outlet. I screamed and grabbed at her leg, but her hand stretched to reach it. It connected, but unfortunately, it seemed she'd blown that out completely the last time. No shock was administered. Ellie kicked me off and stood, searching for a weapon, for a way out. It gave me a second to reason with her, person to person. That practiced BS now scared right out of me, but she responded with a level-headed reason that made it feel almost like like she was speaking in my best interest. "You don't understand. I'm the last one. He needs me." She raced across the room to the dresser, rifling through the top drawer. I went to pull her off when she struck me hard across the face. It wasn't a punch to harm as much as a utility swipe, keeping me away as economically as possible. I was a few feet away when she pulled the knife from the drawer. There wasn't any fanfare, no waiting to see the horrified look on my face. She just sliced it as fast as she possibly could. I don't remember if it was 2 or 3 good hacks before Tom rushed in to tackle her. In one swoop, he was able to pin her while cleanly plucking the blade from her grip. Blood pooled as he steadied her flailing arms with ease, getting the one she had sliced into the open. "You okay?" Once we had established that I was at least physically unharmed, I got back to work wrapping her wrist, stopping the brunt of the blood flow. Tom reinstated order to my rapidly deteriorating nightmare. As much as she wailed and cried in that first minute, she settled completely as she was padded up and restrained for transport. Her dead eyes followed me back and forth across the room as I spoke to the police officers that had arrived, burned into my scalp even when I turned around. She seemed to have come to a realization, something that set her at complete peace even here in the reality she had been forced back into. Stupid me, I reasoned that maybe I'd given her a new lease on life, something she would cherish. Stupid. That was a week ago. There were 5 total ritual suicides that night, aside from Ellie. All were successful. The first was a young artist who burned herself on a pyre, setting her warehouse studio aflame. That was the inferno that caught Tom and I in the traffic heap. My first patient died 2 days later. He was a 12-year-old boy suffering from asphyxia after eating some mislabeled Chinese food. An EpiPen was administered by his mom, but it wasn't enough. We arrived in time and got the epinephrine IV in. However, his heart responded in a bizarre fashion. It began to rapidly slow with the increasing dose. He wasn't just dying, it was like I was killing him. He died so fast it took his mom 2 minutes to realize. The longest 2 minutes of my life. 1 is a fluke, but 6 are a pattern. 5 more of my patients would die, some with completely non-life-threatening conditions. My supervisor comforted me after the first, but things darkened quickly from there. Despite the fact that I was investigated and could not have done anything different, I was suspended indefinitely. It took me almost a week to find Ellie. From the hospital, they bounced her between a few psych wards until landing her at one for, shall we say, more intense cases. Despite this, their windows were not barred, just thick and secured tight with latches. Something told me hers would be unlocked. It was. She's sleeping. Been this way for the last hour. I've gripped and released the knife in my pocket 100 times over, though. The taxi jolted to a stop in front of the hotel, a monolith of grandeur and forgotten glamour. I paid the driver and stepped out, scanning the facade that had stood the test of time, hiding within the walled secrets that the city had tried to bury. My name's Michael Turner. I'm a detective by trade and obsession. I guess you could call me grizzled, hardened by years of chasing shadows in this unforgiving city. Today, I was to face an enigma that had danced just out of reach of law enforcement for decades. Room 313. As I walked towards the ornate entrance, memories of my last failed investigation ambushed me. I blinked against the sudden sting in my eyes. Emily, my partner and the more optimistic half of our duo, was gone. Our last case had taken her away, stolen by a faceless criminal we'd never managed to apprehend. Her loss was a wound, fresh and raw, and it had only served to drive my determination deeper. Not for revenge, but for justice, for answers. And that's what led me to room 313. Check-in was smooth. The concierge barely betrayed any surprise when I requested the key to the infamous room. His eyes held a flicker of something, though. Pity, maybe fear, doesn't matter. I grabbed the key and headed towards the elevator, the gleaming brass number 313 engraved on it, a constant reminder of my purpose. The hallway leading to 313 was surprisingly mundane. The carpet was dull, nondescript patterns that seemed completely at odds with the stories tied to it. It reminded me of the countless crime scenes I'd been to over the years. The mundane, wrapped around the macabre. Reality, dancing a deadly waltz with the unseen. I slid the key into the lock, the door creaking open, that had become a character in the city's darkest nightmares. I dropped my bag by the bed, the simple action resonating in the silence. Room 313. How many lives had it claimed? How many stories had it silenced? Each death was a question, each victim a mystery. I stared around, my eyes falling on a picture hanging on the wall. It was an old black and white shot of the hotel in its heyday, a beacon of opulence and power, now a monument to death. I moved to the window, staring out at the sprawling cityscape. Lights twinkled, life moved on, oblivious to the room of death I now occupied. I couldn't help but think of Emily. Would we have cracked this case together? The thought was bitter, the loss suddenly immeasurable. After setting my bag down, I began the initial survey of room 313. My eyes swept across every inch of the room, every corner, every crevice, looking for clues. Anything could be a clue, a piece of a decades-old puzzle that had eluded so many before me. As I walked deeper into the room, I couldn't shake off the cold draft that seemed to follow me. It wasn't a steady, natural current, but erratic gusts that made the thin curtains flutter like disturbed spirits. I went over to the window, expecting to find it slightly ajar, but it was sealed shut, the paint around the edges thick and uncracked. The chill wasn't coming from outside. It was emanating from within the room itself. There was a peculiar hum in the air, a low, throbbing vibration that tickled the back of my skull. It was almost imperceptible, drowned out by the muted sounds of the city below. But in the quiet moments, between the distant honks of traffic and the occasional murmur of hotel staff in the corridors, I could hear it, persistent, unyielding. Next came the lights. They flickered with a life of their own, dancing shadows across the wall in a haunting ballet. Initially, I chalked it up to the hotel's old wiring, but there was a rhythm to it, a pattern that sent shivers down my spine. They seemed to react, dimming when I ventured towards certain corners, brightening when I approached others. And then there was the noise, soft whispers that drifted through the room, incoherent but palpable, a sudden clattering like something metallic dropping on the floor, even though nothing seemed out of place. The distant sound of children's laughter, chilling in its mirth. None of it made sense, yet all of it set my nerves on edge. I spent hours documenting everything. The cold drafts, the lights, the sounds. My recorder never left my side, a faithful companion that captured the eerie symphony of room 313. Yet as I sat on the edge of the ancient bed, the weight of the room's history pressing down on me, I felt a flicker of doubt. Could I really do this? Could I solve a mystery that seemed more rooted in the supernatural than the physical? As darkness fell and the strange noises of 313 grew louder, I slipped into a fitful sleep. With it came the dreams, though dreams feels like too soft a word. These were nightmares, woven with the tragic tapestry of Room 313's history. Each night I found myself in a different area, witnessing events that I knew were reenactments of the murders that had made 313 famous. I was there, but not as myself, rather an invisible bystander, forced to watch the horror unfold with grim helplessness. One night I stood in the room as it was in 1940. I watched in horror as a woman in a flapper dress was strangled by an unseen force. Her terrified eyes locked onto mine as she clawed at her throat, her gasps for air growing weaker until they were no more. Another night I was back in the 60s. A businessman was pacing nervously in the room. Suddenly the lights went out, and when they flickered back, his lifeless body lay sprawled on the floor, his eyes wide open in an eternal stare of fear. Each dream was a horrific puzzle piece, a chilling glimpse into the atrocities that Room 313 had witnessed. They weren't just dreams. They were echoes of the past, reaching out to me, pleading for me to uncover their truth. While they provided crucial insights into each murder, they also took a heavy toll on my mental health. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding, the echoes of their final screams still lingering in my ears. Each morning was a struggle to pull myself together, to remind myself of the task at hand, of the justice these souls deserved. The boundaries between sleep and wakefulness started to blur, and the shadows of Room 313 seemed to creep into my consciousness, even during the day. The constant whispering, the flickering lights, the reoccurring nightmares began to gnaw at my sanity. My hands shook as I pored over my notes, the victims' faces merging into one another, their terror becoming my own. The distinction between night and day began to blur in Room 313 as the supernatural happenings became my reality. The room, like an entity in its own right, started revealing itself to me. Ghostly apparitions began to manifest during the waking hours, their eternal forms flickering in and out of existence, like phantoms caught in a limbo between the past and the present. A spectral woman in a flapper dress would point to a hidden compartment under the bed, leading me to a pearl necklace, her eyes filled with a desperate plea. The translucent figure of the businessman from the 60s would appear next to the window, his hands reaching out towards the view outside, where a long-forgotten sign revealed the name of his company. Each apparition led me towards clues, their spectral guidance a chilling beacon in the darkness. As I pieced together their stories, their ties to Room 313, an eerie pattern began to emerge. The victims, all from different eras, shared one commonality: their birthday. Strange enough, it was the same as mine, a chilling coincidence that sent a shiver down my spine. It was as if 313 had chosen me, not just to reveal its secrets, but also to tie me to it in a deadly narrative. It seemed impossible, surreal even, but the evidence was right there. Birth certificates, diaries, newspaper clippings, all painting a chilling picture of shared fates and cursed timelines. It was like a dark thread spun from the loom of destiny, binding all of us to Room 313. My heart pounded in my chest as I sat amidst the clues, the links, the ghostly echoes of shared birthdays. I couldn't help but wonder what it meant. Was I just another character in this twisted tale, my fate tied to Room 313, just like the victims before me? Or was I here to break the cycle, to finally shed light on the dark enigma that had claimed so many lives? As I delved deeper into the mystery of Room 313, an undercurrent of unease grew stronger, wrapping itself around the room like a chilling shroud. The once benign whispers turned into malicious growls. The temperature dropped dramatically, and an ominous feeling of being watched began to haunt me. One afternoon, I was flipping through a victim's diary, and the room's chandelier began to swing violently, almost as if in protest. Before I could react, the heavy fixture plummeted down, crashing onto the spot where I'd been sitting seconds ago. The close call left my heart pounding in my chest, my mind grappling with the reality and the danger I'd narrowly avoided. The very next day, while I was studying the faded pictures of a victim, an icy gust of wind whipped through the room, extinguishing the lights. The darkness was suffocating, impenetrable. A floorboard creaked, followed by a muffled sound of an approaching entity. I held my breath, feeling an intangible presence closing in. As a searing pain shot through my arm, I ignited my flashlight, revealing a shard of glass slicing into my skin. A mere second later, and it could have pierced my heart. Each encounter with the room's vengeful spirits left me with a chilling realization. The ghosts of Room 313 were growing more hostile. Their spectral warnings had turned into lethal threats. It was as if they were warning me off, their spectral forms forming deadly traps around each clue I discovered. But why? Didn't they want me to solve the mystery? Weren't they crying out for justice? Their stories begging to be heard? The malevolent resistance puzzled me, only fueling my determination to seek the truth. While going through a trunk filled with old photographs, I stumbled upon an aged black and white picture of a grand party. It was held in Room 313, which was far more opulent and lively than its present state. At the center of the revelry stood a distinguished man, no doubt the hotel's founder, surrounded by well-wishers. The back of the photograph bore the date, the same birthday that connected me, the founder, and the victims. An unsettling realization dawned upon me. Room 313 was where the hotel's founder, who also shared our peculiar birthday, held his grand birthday celebration. But amidst the joy and the laughter, a dark cloud loomed, a tragedy that would forever taint these walls. In a dusty, forgotten corner of the room, I found a secret drawer camouflaged in the intricate woodwork. It held a leather-bound journal, its pages brittle with age. The script inside revealed the chilling past of Room 313. The entries were from the hotel's founder, documenting his life, and more importantly, his birthdays. One entry in particular was smudged with something that looked suspiciously like dried tears. It told a harrowing tale of a birthday party gone horribly wrong, an act of betrayal that ended in a bloody feud, resulting in several deaths, all born on the shared date. The founder himself, guilt-ridden and desolate, met a tragic end within the cursed walls of Room 313. A chill ran down my spine. That was the genesis of the curse. The room, steeped in guilt and fury of the bloody birthday event, became a vengeful entity, forever haunted by its past. It was as if the special energies were anchored to that fatal event, repeating the cycle of death on a shared date. And here I was, another soul born on that cursed day, standing amidst the spectral remains of the past. I was targeted, drawn into this macabre dance of death and hauntings by a date that was supposed to be a cause of celebration. Armed with my newly discovered evidence, I marched to the hotel's management office. The door to the manager's office was imposing, heavy mahogany that spoke of the grandeur this place had once held. I knocked, and the door creaked open, revealing a man hunched over a mountain of paperwork. "Detective Turner, what can I do for you?" he said, barely glancing up from his desk. I tossed the worn-out journal on top of the paperwork. "Explain this," I said, my voice cutting through the silence. He looked startled, his eyes widening as he picked up the old book, leafing through the brittle pages. His face went pale as he read, but he quickly regained his composure. "Yes, I'm aware of the room's history," he admitted, choosing his words carefully. "The tragic events that took place here are a sad part of the hotel's past. But you didn't think it necessary to inform me of this," I reported, anger flaring in my voice. The room is cursed. It's a death trap for those born on a specific date. My birthday. I assure you, Detective, we had no knowledge of this birthday curse, he responded, though his gaze wavered, hinting at deceit. We thought the hauntings were just urban legend. But the clues added up differently. The man was lying. The hotel had been capitalizing on the room's morbid history, using it as a selling point to attract guests who were intrigued by the supernatural. I slammed my hand down on the desk, causing him to jump. You exploited the victims suffering for profit. You knowingly put people in danger. And for what? A couple extra bucks? He looked at me then, a hint of remorse flickering in his eyes, but he said nothing. Instead, he bowed his head in guilty silence. The confrontation left a bitter taste in my mouth. I had to uncover the truth. A truth the hotel manager had chosen to ignore. Room 313 wasn't just a paranormal oddity. It was a death trap. As I stood before the room, its dark aura seemed to pulsate with unseen energy, as if awaiting my return. My heart pounded in my chest as I pushed open the door, stepping into the room that had now become an all-too-familiar haunting ground. With the room's secrets unveiled, the atmosphere felt more oppressive than before. The walls, stained with untold pain and sorrow, seemed to close in on me, but I squared my shoulders, fortified my resolve, and spoke into the silent gloom. I know what happened here. I know about the curse. A cold wind swept through the room, sending shivers down my spine. Shadows danced in the corners, forming spectral silhouettes of their victims. I know you're all victims of a horrendous betrayal. I promise you, I will bring justice to your untimely deaths. The response was immediate. A surge of paranormal activity washed over me. The ethereal figures appeared, their ghostly faces contorted in pain and anger. One, more solid than the rest, stepped forward. The Founder. His spectral eyes were full of torment as they bore into mine. "We seek peace," his voice echoed through the room, a chilling sound that seemed to come from every direction. "Can you offer us that, Detective?" "I can, and I will," I responded, holding his spectral gaze. "But I need your help. I need to know everything." A moment of silence passed before the room convulsed violently. The chandelier swayed, lights flickered, and a cold gust blew around me, turning into a vortex. I felt the room closing in on me, the darkness creeping over my senses. "No!" I shouted above the cacophony, the room shaking as if the very foundations of the hotel were rebelling against me. "I won't be your next victim. I'm here to help you." With every ounce of strength I had left, I pulled myself towards the door, fighting against the unseen forces trying to keep me. The door handle was ice cold, numbing my fingers. I yanked it open and tumbled outside, gasping for breath. As I lay on the corridor, the carpeted floor underneath me, the room settled. The door slammed shut. The final showdown had been draining, the room testing my resolve and nearly claiming me in the process. The following days were a blur of restless activity. I pored over every bit of evidence I had on room 313, cross-referencing with public records and local news archives. The daunting puzzle began to piece itself together, painting a bleak picture of a hotel exploiting its dark history for profit. I arranged a press conference. The thought of standing in front of the media, my words echoing in their microphones, sent a shiver down my spine. But the victims deserved their stories to be heard. As the cameras began to roll and the reporters hushed, I took a deep breath and began. "Ladies and gentlemen, I stand before you today, not as Detective Michael Turner, but as a spokesperson for the forgotten souls of room 313. I told them everything. The birthday curse, the victims, the spectral encounters, most importantly, the hotel manager's role in exploiting the tragedy. Their silence told me they were shocked, but I could also see the wheels turning, connecting the dots. After the press conference, I confronted the hotel manager again. This time, I had the eyes of the public on my side. You've played with lives, disregarded the dead, and for what? I spat out, slamming the damned evidence on his desk. A bit of profit? A little thrill? The manager, pale and shaken, had no choice but to accept responsibility. We'll take steps to correct this, to remember the victims properly, he stammered, his previous arrogance long gone. The hotel was forced to address its haunted past. Room 313 was sealed with a plaque put out as a memorial to the victims, acknowledging their unjust demise. A promise of reform was made to prevent further exploitation of the paranormal events within the hotel. As I left the hotel for the last time, I glanced back at room 313. There was a silence, a sense of relief that seemed to resonate from it. The victims were no longer a tragic tale spun for profit. Their memories were respected, their stories heard. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I'd carried their stories, their hopes for justice, and we had won. As I walked away, the haunting echoes of room 313 seemed quieter, softer, a step towards peace, towards redemption, for them as well as for me. My name is Sydney White. I'm writing this because my therapist thinks it'll help. I'm honestly willing to try anything to get a little peace of mind at this point. For my background, this incident began in April of my junior year of high school when I was 16. I'm about average height with blue eyes and long brown hair. My mom and I live alone in an old 19th century Victorian-style house that's been passed down in our family for generations. Someday I'm set to inherit the house, though I'm not sure I really want it anymore. The house is complete with 3 stories, a basement, and a sizable front and back porch. There's a chest-high iron fence surrounding the property. My room's on the 2nd floor. It has a white marble balcony with 2 elegant glass doors leading onto it. Ever since I was little, I'd always adored the house. The ancient black and white photographs of my ancestors, outdated furniture, the relics gathered by family members throughout the years, all instilled in me a longing sense of nostalgia. As a child, I would often just sit in the living room for hours, daydreaming of what it would have been like to live here decades ago, or even centuries before. I would let my imagination run wild with fantasies from times long ago, until eventually Mom would drag me from my stupor and urge me to play with the other kids in the area. This was my only qualm with the house. Due to its old and slightly dilapidated state, I found it very difficult to keep friends. The other kids constantly whispered amongst themselves, and rumors that the house was haunted spread like wildfire on a dry summer day. The creaking of the floorboards and the whistling of the AC unit through the empty corridors were sounds that I'd almost grown accustomed to after residing there my entire life. To the other kids, though, this was hard proof that there were ghosts roaming the halls, waiting to claim their next victim. The same routine would play out time and time again, every time I brought a new friend over. After a little coaxing, they'd come inside, stay for a couple of minutes, then make up some half-hearted excuse to hightail it back home. My humble abode repelled more children than Monster House. Due to this, I didn't have many friends growing up, and the trend continued well into my high school years. So you can imagine my excitement when Alex from my 3rd period English class announced that he was throwing a party while his parents were out of town, and that the whole class was invited. I was ecstatic. I'd never even hung out with the boys, let alone gone to a party. The days leading up to the event were filled with anxious anticipation. I was obsessing over the thought that I might meet a cute boy and have my first taste of alcohol, all in one glorious night. Then the date finally arrived, and I was a bundle of nerves. I'd spent hours curling my hair and perfecting my makeup, convinced that at some point my knight in shining armor would glide in and sweep me off my feet. I had made arrangements to ride to the party with Stephanie, a somewhat nerdy girl who didn't have many friends of her own. I knew she only offered to take me so she wouldn't have to show up to the party by herself, but I didn't mind. Honestly, I didn't want to arrive alone either. After what felt like hours, Stephanie's blue Honda Civic inched up my driveway. I sauntered towards the vehicle, radiating confidence. "Have fun, Sydney," Mom yelled after me, as her gaze followed me down the drive from the spot in the doorway. "And try not to drink too much," she mused with a wink. A smile had spread across her face that I couldn't help but chuckle at. I always thought my mom was gorgeous, a trait that was, unfortunately, not passed down to me. I was reminded of that fact all too often, as it was a popular topic amongst school bullies. "It's not that kind of party, Mom," I lied as I rolled my eyes dramatically. "Whatever you say," she shrugged, flashing a toothy grin. Mom's long blonde hair fluttered in the breeze as she waved goodbye. Her deep green eyes shimmered with pride, hoping in vain that I'd form some semblance of a friendship. The party was a major letdown. I won't bore you with too many details, but only about 10 people actually showed up, including us. I didn't realize how gross beer would taste, but I somehow managed to choke down a couple of Budweisers. After being hit on by nearly every guy at the party, I begged Stephanie to take me home. She was having more fun than I was, but after some persisting, she begrudgingly caved. The ride back to my house was marred by a tense, uncomfortable silence. As Stephanie hurriedly peeled away, I stumbled up the driveway and fished into my pocket for my house key. I'd gotten a little more tipsy than I realized, and my already lackluster cognitive skills eluded me. I eventually located the key, though. I jabbed at the keyhole, and after a couple of sloppy attempts, the door clicked open. I crept up the stairs as silently as I could in my inebriated state, putting forth my best effort not to wake up my mother. Once I made it up the stairs, I ran through my nightly bedtime routine and retreated to my room. I popped into bed and tried to drift off to sleep, the immense disappointment of the night still fresh in my mind. After a few minutes of restlessly tossing and turning, I picked up on a noise at my balcony door. I perceived that the sound was like a faint tapping on the glass. Tap, tap, tap. I drowsingly glanced over at my alarm clock. Midnight. I ignored it and rolled onto my side, facing the wall. Probably just a tree branch. But then, the tapping escalated to 3 knocks in rapid succession. Tap, tap, tap. I shot up in bed as a pang of fear coursed through me. I whipped my head to the balcony, fully expecting to lock eyes with some horrid creature, and nothing. It must have been the alcohol messing with my head. A little shaken up, I laid back and somehow fell into a fitful slumber. The following morning, I woke up to the tantalizing aroma of bacon and eggs wafting upstairs from the kitchen. I stumbled out of bed and groggily traced the scent downstairs, where Mom was cooking breakfast. "Good morning, sleepyhead," she giggled. "Morning," I croaked, trying and failing to rub the sleep out of my eyes. "Did you have fun last night?" Mom asked, as she placed a mouth-watering concoction of eggs, bacon, and toast before me. "Yeah, I guess," I wearily replied, shoveling food into my mouth. I wasn't feeling great from the night before, and the hot meal was just what the doctor ordered. "Meet any cute guys?" Mom prodded, a smile plastering itself across her face. "Oh yeah, some real cute Leonardo DiCaprios," I sarcastically remarked, mouth nearly overflowing with eggs. "By the way, you didn't hear any knocking from any of the windows last night, did you?" I inquired nonchalantly. "No. When did you hear that?" she asked quizzically, concern washing over her countenance. Never mind. It was probably just a tree branch," I blundered between chews, attempting to ease Mom's tension. "Okay, just please let me know if you hear it again," she requested sternly, seeming relieved by my statement. The remainder of the day was mostly uneventful. After breakfast, I wasted the day watching Netflix. I finished off my evening by knocking out some homework. It was Saturday, but getting my work out of the way early provided me a sense of productivity. After putting my books away and brushing my teeth, I hopped into bed. I'm usually off in dreamland no later than 10:30, and that night was no different. I laid back and shut my eyes, but I was having an uncharacteristically tough time falling asleep. I was overthinking, stressing myself out over the upcoming chemistry exam, something I felt wildly unprepared for. I had just started to nod off when I heard it. The same rhythmic tapping on my balcony door. Tap, tap, I lazily turned to the clock. Midnight. Before I could divert my attention to the noise, it started again, but this time it was much louder. Tap, tap, tap. Again, I bolted upright and fixed my gaze on the balcony. My heart pounded against my rib cage, and I thought it would leap through my chest at any given moment. I could have sworn for a split second that I glimpsed a shadow ducking out of view. I don't have to tell you, I was more than a little creeped out at this point. I shined my flashlight at the door and discovered an absence of creepy shadow people. I laid back down and breathed deeply in an attempt to regulate my racing heart. I again wrote it off as a tree branch or my mind playing tricks on me, and eventually I managed to doze off. The tapping continued every night going forward. Right at midnight, I'd be ripped from my peaceful slumber to a commotion at the balcony that wouldn't cease until I'd inevitably turn to face it. And every time, there was nothing there. After a couple of weeks, it was beginning to take a toll on me. I was sleep deprived. My grades began to slip. People started to notice. Concerned teachers pulled me aside and asked if everything was okay at home. Classmates were telling me I looked like a ghost. Mom repeatedly questioned me on it, but I just told her that I was stressed about the exams. I desperately needed to put a stop to this incessant tapping. One night, I'd had enough. As usual, at midnight, I was yanked from my peaceful sleep. I had made up my mind. This time, I was going to ignore it. It started off light. Tap, tap, tap. Then it grew louder and increased in frequency. Tap, tap, tap. I was determined not to look. I kept my eyes firmly shut, even when the slapping turned into a pounding. Boom, boom, boom. I was beginning to worry that whatever or whoever it was would crack the glass. Irritated, I relented, and my eyes wandered to the double doors. What I saw chilled me to my very core. There was a man standing on the balcony. Dirty, tattered clothing hung off his emaciated frame like rags. He was deathly thin, reminiscent of a skeleton, with his skin stretched tightly over bones. Stringy, greasy black hair fell past his shoulders. The wide smile that blossomed across his face revealed black gums and yellow, rotting teeth. His manic expression never faltered, but worst of all were his eyes. Those black, pinpoint pupils connected to mine, and I could sense something beneath them, even through the glass. Hunger, a deep animalistic drive that I can only describe as predatory. Then he spoke. "Oh, Sydney, I can see you," he sang in a sickly sweet tone. "Please let me in. I just want to play," he called, giddy with excitement. My heart dropped into my stomach. Something sinister lurked just beyond the surface of those words. He licked his lips, his disgusting gray tongue worming its way around the rim of his mouth. I tried to avert my gaze, but I was rooted in fear. Sweat pooled on my brow, and my hands shook uncontrollably. My breathing became rapid and shallow. A million thoughts raced through my brain in unison. Who was this man? How did he get onto my second-floor balcony? How the hell did he know my name? I was broken from my trance by the forceful hammering against the door. The man's smile was gone, having developed into an expression of pure hatred. "Let me in, you bitch! Let me in! Let me in!" With each repetition, his fist smashed against the glass, rattling the door in its frame. Then, out of nowhere, he paused, eyes eagerly lighting up as his twisted smile returned, stretching so far that I thought the corners of his mouth might tear. "It's okay, Sydney. You won't let me in? Then I'll do it myself, 'cause I found where you hid the key." He could barely contain his elation as he produced an ancient rusted key from an indistinguishable pocket in his ragged clothes. My head spun and my vision blurred. This couldn't be happening. He slipped the key into the door and unlocked it with a nauseating click. At last, my body regained mobility, and I went into full panic mode. I leapt out of bed and bolted down the hall to my mom's room. The man's deranged cackling reverberated off the walls behind me. His thunderous footsteps were closing the distance. I burst through the door and slammed it shut, waking my mother in the process. "Sid, it's the middle of the night. What's going on?" she groaned lazily. I locked the door and sputtered a nearly incoherent string of words. "Mom, man, inside, police!" I choked out before I broke down, tears streaming down my face. The hallway had gone eerily silent as I sobbed hysterically. Mom stared at me for a second, bewildered, but she did call the cops. They took a statement from me and combed through the house. Of course, by then the man was long gone, and there wasn't much they could do. The balcony doors were even shut and locked when they arrived, so there was no evidence that the man had been on the property at all. They urged us not to hesitate to call back if he returned, and reassured us that they'd send a cruiser down our street intermittently for the next few nights. I slept in Mom's room for a week after that. I questioned her about the hidden spare key, but she swore up and down that there were only 2 house keys. We installed cameras and a home security system, but even then I couldn't bring myself to sleep in that room again. I moved all my things down the hall into an unoccupied room, away from the balcony. Suddenly, every resonance terrified me. Noises that I had previously attributed to the age of the house didn't sound like the normal creaks and whistles anymore. I started going to therapy. After a few weeks, the therapists, my classmates, even my mom, had begun to convince me that I had imagined the whole ordeal. I almost believed them. Almost. My therapist told me that I would never be able to fully heal until I stepped out onto that balcony. So about a month after the incident, I finally built up enough courage to walk out there. I rested my hands on the smooth white marble and peered out over the neighborhood. Spring was among us, and the flowers were in full bloom. I soaked it all in as the wind blew my hair and the dragonflies zipped past my face. I watched a robin feeding its babies in the tall oak tree in our front yard. Bushy-tailed squirrels bounced along, searching for acorns. It was picturesque. I felt completely at peace, standing there just observing nature. All the stress I'd built up from that night was immediately washed away. Until I glanced down, because as I lifted my hands off the stone railing, a strand of long silver hair clung to my fingers.